Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're slipping into the quiet shadows of the Cold War, a world of dim alleyways, coded messages, and identities worn like borrowed coats. You're not a hero or a mastermind, just an unnoticed operative drifting through a city that never stops watching. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You move through the city long before most people have decided whether they are awake. The air is cool enough to make your breath visible, rising like thin smoke between the buildings. It is an hour when the world feels hesitant, still deciding what kind of day it plans to become. You step onto the quiet pavement with the deliberate calm of someone who knows the value of arriving unnoticed, and the city accepts you without question. It always has. It knows you, or rather, it knows the idea of you. The public version crafted with careful hands, like a portrait touched up until it barely resembles the model. The cobblestones keep their own counsel as you walk, offering a faint, uneven rhythm beneath your shoes. To your left, the old quarter's narrow alleys yawn open like half-forgotten memories. To your right, the newer streets stretch out with a calculated neatness, the kind that governments build when they want to seem modern. You belong to both spaces and to neither. Your reflection in a shop window seems unsure which side of the glass it should prefer. You carry yourself like someone who has rehearsed the role of a citizen, but with the quiet awareness that your true lines live elsewhere. A tram rattles past, not fast, not slow, but with the weary patience of something that has been crossing the same route for decades. It groans like a witness who has seen too much and has grown tired of testifying. Inside, workers stare forward with the blank devotion of people whose lives are defined by routine. You envy them a little. Not their certainty, because even they don't have that, but their ability to believe, even for a moment, that their world is simple. You learned long ago that simplicity is the most elaborate illusion of all. As you continue down the boulevard, you feel that familiar tug again, the strange sensation of stepping between two invisible currents. One life pulls you toward the quiet government office where you file papers, take notes in dull meetings, and pretend to care about the efficiency of postal routes. The other life drifts in the opposite direction, into alleyways where whispers carry, where coded glances sharpen into meaning, and where your real work, the work no one acknowledges, waits patiently. Both lives demand your presence. Both deny you the right to belong. You pass a kiosk where a vendor is spreading newspapers across his counter. Headlines speak with the confidence of institutions that believe they understand the world. You know better. The city is never as certain as it pretends to be. Somewhere behind each headline lies a memo, a hidden meeting, a poorly lit stairwell where truths are exchanged like contraband. You sometimes find yourself smiling at the earnestness of it all, the grand declarations, the bold predictions, when so much of history is shaped by tired people making rushed decisions in rooms that smell of stale coffee. A light snow begins to fall, the kind that melts the moment it touches the ground. The flakes drift lazily, as though even gravity is half asleep. You lift your gloved hand and let a few land on your skin. For a brief second, they hold their shape, tiny stars with impossible designs, before dissolving into nothing. They remind you of conversations you've had under dim lamps, trading phrases that vanish the moment they're understood. You cross a small bridge that divides the city into its two familiar halves. The river below moves with a muted determination, carrying fragments of ice that clink softly against one another. The sound is delicate, almost polite, as if the water refuses to disturb your thoughts. Some cities demand your attention with noise and spectacle. This one prefers to whisper. It lets you believe you're in control while quietly rearranging everything behind your back. On the far side of the bridge, you pause near a building whose facade bears the scars of earlier decades. Pitted stone, faint scorch marks, a balcony with iron rails bent just slightly off true. The war left its handwriting everywhere, and the city never bothered to erase it. People call these marks reminders. You call them footnotes. History loves to annotate itself, but rarely in ways that help anyone sleep at night. A man walks past you with a bundle of letters tucked under his arm. He nods politely, unaware that his mail route intersects with one of your own drop points. You feel a faint ripple of amusement. He believes he carries simple correspondence, bills, invitations, perhaps a complaint about the plumbing. In reality, at least one envelope in that bundle contains a detail someone risked much to obtain. A detail that will later be exaggerated, misinterpreted, debated in a room full of grey suits who insist they alone grasp the truth. And then the cycle will repeat. The Cold War excels at manufacturing certainty out of confusion. You sometimes think the city itself participates in the act, shaping fog around street lamps and corners just to reinforce the atmosphere. You keep walking until you reach a quiet residential block where the buildings lean gently inward, as if confiding in one another. Laundry lines stretch overhead, frozen shirts and trousers hanging like flags of mundane existence. The smell of coal smoke drifts from a nearby chimney, mixing with the faint aroma of cabbage and boiled potatoes. It is the fragrance of ordinary life, a life you borrow but never fully inhabit. For a moment, you wonder what it would feel like to simply live here without the constant awareness of your own performance. A cat sits perched on a windowsill, its eyes half-lidded as it surveys the street. It watches you with the impartial curiosity of a creature who has seen countless versions of the same morning. The world changes. The cat remains unmoved. You find comfort in its indifference. Animals do not care about your aliases, your codes, your secrets. They see only shapes and movement, warmth and threat. In their eyes, you are just another passerby. Further down the street, a church bell tolls once, not to signal anything in particular, but simply because it has done so every morning for longer than anyone remembers. The echo lingers, drifting through the chilly air like a reminder that time moves even when history feels stuck in stalemate. You listen carefully, letting the sounds settle into the rhythm of your steps. There is peace in this routine, even if it is borrowed peace. You reach a bench near a small park where leaves crunch under the thin crust of snow. This is the place where one version of you might stop to rest, adjusting your coat and pretending to read the newspaper. The other version of you passes by without slowing, already calculating where to be seen, where not to be seen, and how to appear unaware of your own precision. You sit between these two impulses, inhabiting neither fully. The world believes your loyalties are firm. You know they are more like mist, present but always shifting. The city begins to stir around you. Windows glow with pale light. Footsteps multiply on the sidewalks. Voices rise in soft conversation. A new day unfolds, repeating familiar gestures with renewed conviction. You remain still for a moment longer, listening to the subtle harmonies of a city, waking into its contradictions. It is here, in this quiet pause between identities, that the strangeness of your life settles in. You are someone who negotiates truth the way others negotiate price at a market stall. You speak with confidence, even when the truth is only loosely tethered to reality. You maintain expressions you do not feel, adopt habits that are not yours, and answer to names that dissolve when spoken too loudly. The city does not mind. It forgives your borrowed faces. It even seems to encourage them. You rise from the bench, brushing a thin layer of snow from your coat. The day waits for you, patient and curious. You step forward, letting the city decide which version of you it will see first. And as you walk deeper into the waking streets, you feel the quiet weight of your dual existence settle over your shoulders, not as a burden, but as a familiar cloak you've worn so long it almost feels like skin. Your roles shift, your steps continue, and the city, with all its divided loyalties and half-told stories, walks with you. You wake before the day has decided how loudly it wants to exist. The window is a pale rectangle. Beyond it, the city breathes in a dim, steady rhythm, as if holding itself in polite attention. You lie very still for a moment, feeling the thin separation between the person who sleeps and the person who must be ready to step into view. It is a familiar pause, not anxious, simply practiced, like the quiet intake before a long measured performance. The tram you heard earlier now hums its nearer song, a metallic lullaby that travels through walls and past street trees. Somewhere far off, a factory bell marks a shift change, its tone as ordinary as a clock. These sounds settle you. They are the natural punctuation of a day that will ask you to be believable. You let the noise fill the room while you assemble yourself in slow movements, each action precise as the mechanics of a well-made watch. Your routine is made of small gestures that answer to other people's expectations. Fold the blanket neatly, shave the unremarkable shadow from your jaw, button the collar to the middle hole where neither austerity nor vanity takes hold. Each motion is practiced until it becomes indistinguishable from sincerity. You have learned to value the texture of authenticity, not because everything you do must be genuine, but because genuine gestures are harder to manufacture, and the world trusts them first. The kettle's first sputter sounds distant, like a ship's bell across a harbour. Steam curls up when you pour the water over grounds measured to a level that looks effortless on the outside. Your coffee is neither bitter nor extravagant. It is the sort that fits in a hand and in a conversation, the kind that supports polite opinions. You breathe in the scent, cinnamon and faint smoke from the coal that still colours the air in certain districts. The aroma anchors you, a small honest pleasure amid the necessary falsehoods. You stand at the kitchen window with the mug warming your palms. Below, a postal worker trundles past with a cart of letters, his breath clouding the morning like a small white thought. You watch him, because watching is part of knowing how to occupy space. He believes his route is a map of civic duty, unaware that it is also a web of chance, one that sometimes brushes against the crinkled edges of your clandestine life. The realization brings a private smile that is not unkind. People like him make a workable stage for your profession. Dressing is a ritual of intentional ambiguity. You choose clothes that do not shout allegiance, a coat of muted blue, a scarf that could belong to a student or a civil servant, shoes scuffed in a way that suggests practicality rather than poverty. This middle ground is where you live best. It allows you to belong in crowds without forming a crowd of your own. The mirror offers a face you can explain if asked. Neutral, a little absent, the kind of face people trust to hold a brief, polite conversation. There is a pleasure in the small deceptions that go unnoticed. The careful crease in a sleeve, the way you fold a newspaper to match the angle of the sun, the practiced hesitation before you choose a seat in the tram so that you can watch people enter rather than be watched. None of these specifics are dramatic. They are the currency of a life that must look ordinary. You are fond of this economy. It pays in invisibility. Outside, the city moves in a soft choreography. Shopkeepers raise metal shutters with slow, practiced hands, the sound like a shipyard waking. A baker across the street rolls dough in a bowl, the slap of hands and flour, a kind of domestic percussion. You like to stand near these small scenes of domestic industry because they remind you that history is made not only in 70-room offices and grand speeches, but also in the slow repetition of everyday acts. Those acts, more often than not, are where true conviction lives. You take the tram at a corner where the line is seldom crowded. The carriage smells faintly of wet wool and boiled cabbage, scents that travel without apology through the morning. Your fellow passengers drift in and out of sleep. A woman with a shawl clutches a paper bag. An old man hums to himself with rusty contentment. A young man taps rhythmically on a notebook, composing an argument that may never find an audience. You listen to the city's soft litany, the whisper of shoes, the muted cough of engines, the occasional unguarded laugh. People project importance into their routines, and the city obliges them with facades that support those projections. You alight near an administrative building with grey stone and narrow windows, the sort that suggests endurance rather than elegance. Inside, the corridors smell of dust and lemon polish. You pass a portrait of a smiling official whose smile is perfectly varnished, and you wonder, indulgently, if the varnish keeps up with the rest of the facade. You move through the space as anyone might, carrying a satchel that contains legitimate documents and a few carefully folded papers that will later change hands in places that do not issue receipts. This duality is not a scandal to you. It is the carefully balanced mechanism of survival. Your desk is purposely modest, a black lamp, a stack of forms, a fountain pen that insists on a certain deliberateness. You file papers with a patience honed by repetition. Filing is a small religion here. Forms transform chaos into something marketable. To an outsider, you might seem content with clerical peace. To someone who knows where to look, your fingers trace the edges of meaning, like a cartographer reading a coastline for hidden harbours. You do not rush. Rushing leaves traces. Stillness wears sincerity. Colleagues pass by with bits of conversation, talk of supply schedules, the rumoured appointment of a new commissioner, the latest cultural festival the party insists will invigorate morale. People speak with a confident cadence that assumes consequence. You respond with measured nods and the occasional agreeable phrase. Conversation for you is often a theatre, and you have learned the art of minimal applause. Your role is to appear invested without committing. There is a quiet humour in watching earnestness collide with the slow reality of bureaucracy. One of your tasks this morning is to supervise the distribution list for cultural pamphlets. The work seems banal, folding, stamping, arranging, but even the most unremarkable tasks create patterns. You inspect the list with the same careful eye you apply to other matters. Names line up like entries in an account book. Some names are fragrant with rumour, others so ordinary they could be condensed to a single syllable. You make a small notation here and there, marks that look methodical but serve a second purpose. Little decisions like this accumulate like loose coins, and when spent with care, they purchase small advantages. A messenger arrives with a brief envelope, sealed with the crisp, official paper reserved for internal memos. You accept it with a practiced gravitas and tuck it into your satchel. The envelope contains instructions that will be interpreted by men who prefer their decisions to be complex and their presumption even more so. You read the words with an amused detachment, supposed priorities reiterated, strategic aims pronounced as though stating them would shape them into immutable fact. You have seen such pronouncements made by people who imagine themselves architects of history. It is touching, in a way, how resolutely humans insist on their own narratives. Lunch is a quiet affair, a bowl of broth that is warm and plain, a slice of rye. You eat with deliberate slowness, aware that hunger sharpens thought in inconvenient ways. Around you, faces carry the fatigue of endless compromises. People believe their sacrifices are meaningful and that someone else will notice. You let them believe. To disabuse them would be to disturb the soft ecosystem of their comfort. After your meal, you walk through a narrow courtyard that connects two wings of the building. The light there is softer, the shadows longer. You watch a pigeon hop from step to step, indifferent to the significance humans place on the ground beneath their feet. For a moment you indulge in a thought like a small rebellion. What would it mean to choose an identity and keep it? The question is more rhetorical than practical. Choices have consequences, and you have found a certain freedom in not being bound to a single consequence. Your workday follows its measured arc, punctuated by small conversations and the occasional ceremonial flourish of form signing. Each interaction is an exercise in being credible without being conspicuous. It is less deception than choreography. People perform their commitments to ideology as if prayer were a civic duty. You observe and sometimes join in, because belonging to a performance can be restorative, even when you know the script. When the afternoon light thins to the colour of old paper, you leave the building with nothing untoward having occurred, nothing dramatic, just the comforting accumulation of details that will be useful later. The city takes you back in, folding you into its anonymous tide. You carry the day like an alterable diary, pages open to annotation. You are, in all practical senses, someone who does not exist beyond the places where others have decided to keep you. At home once more, you make a second cup of coffee for the small pleasure of ritual repetition. The kettle hisses with the same patient breath as before. You sit by the window and let the light wash slowly over the page you keep for private notes. Not a ledger of betrayals, perhaps, but a list of observations written in the careful hand of a historian cataloguing the world's little gestures. You write nothing of the secret exchanges, nothing overt. Instead, you note the texture of an argument heard on a tram, the scent of a factory lunch passing a street corner, the way a child's laugh slices clean through a crowd's composed seriousness. These are the details that teach you more than any speech. The quiet of the evening approaches with a gradual insistence, like a thought that finally decides to be noticed. You close your notebook and set the pen down. There is a comfort in the day's small falsehoods and half-truths. They are predictable, and predictability is a kind of shelter. You move through your modest apartment with the slow, habitual care of someone who has perfected the art of belonging nowhere and everywhere at once. You lie back for a moment and let the city's low hum seep into your bones. Tomorrow will arrive with its own set of small performances, its own coffee, its own tram songs. For now, you savour the precise stillness between rolls, a silence that is not empty, but full of the comfortable rhythm of practiced duplicity. You are, ultimately, neither wholly one thing nor wholly another. You are the quiet results of choices made softly, day after gentle day, an existence crafted in the long patient work of pretending to be ordinary. The city has settled into its afternoon composure by the time you step onto the street again. The sidewalks have grown denser, and the rhythm of footsteps now resembles the steady pulse of a great living machine. You slip into that flow with the ease of someone who has studied human movement as meticulously as others study languages or mathematics. Blending in is less a skill and more an instinct, a soft alignment with the currents around you. Your stride lengthens or shortens by subtle degrees. You let your shoulders hold an unremarkable slope, the posture of a person with errands to run and no desire to draw questions. Your eyes rest on nothing in particular while registering everything. You've learned that this is the key, to be present without announcing presence, observant without being caught observing. The world rarely pays attention to someone who behaves exactly as expected. A gust of wind travels down the boulevard, carrying loose pages of a poorly printed pamphlet that scuttle across the pavement. People frown at them, sidestepping. As though avoiding a minor contagion, you find yourself quietly amused. The pamphlet's grand declarations of ideology, now tumbling like street litter, reveal how fragile conviction becomes outside the protective glow of official lighting. But no one stops to read them. The crowd is too disciplined, too committed to its own purposes. You move with that same discipline, but without the earnestness. Your motives are not grand. Precision, not passion, guides your steps. You pass vendors selling roasted chestnuts, their stalls fragrant with warmth, a small oasis among the cold brick and stone. A man in a wool coat buys a handful, and the vendor handed it to him with the fussy tenderness of someone offering a religious relic. People cherish the smallest rituals when larger truths feel unstable. You've become an expert at navigating those rituals, knowing which ones to echo and which to let pass. There is a cafe you often drift by on afternoons like this. Its windows are fogged from the heat inside, where students argue about philosophy and old men play slow games of chess. You slow your pace just slightly, enough to listen without being noticed. Fragments of conversation slip through the glass, arguments about the meaning of progress, concerns about rising prices, excitement over a new theatre performance. The voices carry the confidence of people who believe their opinions matter deeply, not realizing how little the future will consult them. You find that paradox oddly comforting. People cling to significance while history moves with an indifferent gait. Your own life runs along that same contradiction, deeply entangled in the machinery of nations, yet destined to leave no trace beyond coded reports and a few cautious nods exchanged in train stations. As you continue walking, you allow your pace to adjust again. A group of factory workers clocks out early and floods the street with heavy steps and hearty voices. You fold yourself into their wake, letting their presence act as camouflage. Their bright scarves and thick boots draw attention away from your neutral clothing, allowing you to exist as a passing shape. You don't imitate their energy. Mimicry is unnecessary. Proximity alone is enough to soften your outline. One of them jokes loudly about ration cards, and the others laugh with the relief of people whose days have been long and repetitive. The laughter is rough but sincere. You absorb the sound, letting it wash over you before you ease out of their orbit and drift toward a quieter avenue. This street is lined with tall, austere buildings whose facades bear plaques with names of committees and offices. People entering them walk with a stiff, purposeful gait, the kind that implies dignity. You have worn that gait yourself and know how hollow it feels beneath the surface. Respectability is its own costume, tailored with straight shoulders and neatly folded papers. You step aside as a group of officials emerges, their briefcases clutched like ceremonial shields. You lower your eyes just enough to appear courteous and let them pass. A bus pulls to a stop ahead, its brakes releasing a sigh that seems almost human. Passengers step off with the blank absorption of minds in transit. You choose a position at the edge of the crowd and let them flow around you. Eyes slide past your face without pausing. No one wonders who you are, and that is precisely the point. You are part of the scenery, an extra in the background of their day, someone who might be remembered as the person in the coat, but even that is generous. Blending in is not about invisibility, you remind yourself, but about conformity. The world does not try to see through people. It tries to categorize them quickly so it can return to its distractions. If you behave in a way that fits a category, tired clerk, distracted teacher, mild-mannered auditor, then the world accepts you without question. You pause briefly at a newspaper stand. The vendor eyes you without suspicion, offering a faint nod as you pick up a paper and skim the headlines. Behind them lie mundane truths masked in important language. Economic announcements that sound like revelations but conceal small adjustments. Cultural achievements trumpeted like proof of national innovation. Smiling faces of leaders who insist history is progressing exactly as intended. You fold the paper neatly and set it back down. The vendor barely glances at you. You have become one of the countless people who pass through his day like drifting mist. Crossing the street, you join a small group gathered at a trolley stop. A mother pulls her child closer, adjusting the little one's hat with brisk affection. A pair of students discuss exam results with nervous bravado. An elderly woman mutters to herself about the chill in the wind. You position yourself just behind them, close enough to be part of the cluster, far enough to avoid engagement. If someone were to look, they would see only a tired commuter awaiting transportation. Yet beneath the calm exterior, your attention is everywhere. The glass of the trolley shelter gives you angled reflections. A man lighting a cigarette, a courier hurrying along with an oversized bag, a policeman adjusting his cap. You observe them as naturally as breathing, not with suspicion, but with a cartographer's curiosity. Every detail here belongs to the landscape. When the trolley arrives, you step aboard with the others. The passengers settle into an arrangement of bodies and rattling metal. You hold onto the rail with a relaxed grip, placing yourself among those who are too occupied with a routine to be remarkable. A young woman opens a book, its pages yellowed from use. A man presses his forehead to the cold glass, watching the blur of buildings drift by like old memories refusing to stay still. You blend into their quiet company. The conductor moves through the car, collecting fares. When he reaches you, you hand over the ticket with the mild distraction of someone whose mind is elsewhere, perhaps on work, perhaps on errands, perhaps on nothing at all. You have mastered that look. It is one of your most reliable tools. The trolley rumbles through the industrial district, where chimneys thrust grey exhaust into the sky. The air tastes of iron and soot, and workers move like silhouettes against factory walls. Their movements are purposeful, synchronized with the chaos of machinery. You exit the trolley near a chain-link fence and join a small trail of pedestrians, heading toward the commercial quarter. Here, blending in becomes effortless. The streets are a mosaic of contrasting personalities. Shopkeepers adjusting displays, clerks clutching ledgers, children darting past with careless enthusiasm. Each person inhabits a role so completely that your neutrality dissolves into the general swirl. You walk slowly, letting the scene unfold in its ordinary grandeur. Blending in is never perfect, of course. Sometimes you catch someone's eyes lingering on you a second too long, searching for a flicker of uniqueness. But people rarely pursue such curiosities. They have chores, obligations, hopes, disappointments, all louder than the quiet puzzle of a stranger's face. By the time they blink, their attention has drifted to the next trivial urgency. As evening begins its slow descent, the light softens into the colour of old photographs. You feel the weight of the day settling onto your shoulders like a familiar coat. Not the coat you wear, but the one sewn from silence, careful observation, and practiced ease. You realise that blending in is less about hiding and more about participating in the city's quiet theatre, a performance where everyone believes they are the only true protagonist. The thought brings a thin, private smile. You continue walking as the streetlights hum awake, letting the crowd shape your pace once more. The world moves around you, busy, unaware, self-important. You drift among them gently, lightly, invisibly, a shadow stitched into the fabric of their certainty. A person who passes through their days without leaving ripples, yet somehow sees every current beneath the surface. A soft breeze follows you as you step off the street and into the warmer hush of the late afternoon. The day has thinned into a gentler glow, and the lamps along the sidewalks have begun to flicker with an uncertain brightness. You move at an easy pace, guided more by habit than intention, until the familiar facade of a cafe appears at the corner where two tram lines meet. Its windows, veiled by steam and cigarette haze, emit a faint amber glow that settles over the pavement like a quiet invitation. You push open the door and let the noise wash over you, not loud enough to overwhelm, but busy in a way that gives cover to subtle gestures. Cups clink in practiced rhythms, spoons tapping ceramic like tiny metronomes. Cigarette smoke curls through the air like a drifting script, its pale ribbons carving soft patterns above crowded tables. The cafe is alive with conversation, yet no one inside seems to mind being only half heard. People want an audience more than understanding. You choose a table near the wall, one with a slightly wobbly leg that you've learned to steady with the side of your boot. From here, your gaze can sweep the room without appearing to do so. The chair sighs under your weight, as though relieved to host someone who will not demand comfort from it. You set down your satchel, the ordinary one, with nothing incriminating stored inside, and place a folded newspaper beside it. A prop, nothing more, meant to suggest you belong to a world of predictable concerns. A waiter approaches with a polite nod, his apron creased from hours of movement. You order a coffee that is neither too strong nor too mild, the kind of drink someone with modest expectations might choose. He walks away with the easy indifference of a man who has served 1,000 similar gestures. You watch him weave through the tables, his movements fluid despite the cramped space. Even waiters, you think, understand how to blend into the backdrop of their own lives. At the table closest to the window, a pair of university students are arguing about literature. One quotes a French philosopher with dramatic conviction, as if channeling revolutionary fervour. The other counters with a poet whose relevance has long since faded. Their voices rise and fall, animated by the belief that they are shaping the cultural direction of the nation. You listen with a faint private amusement. Their passion is sincere, but history has an uncanny talent for rewarding the wrong people. Your coffee arrives. The cup is chipped at the rim, but the warmth it releases is comforting in its simplicity. You cradle it between your hands, letting the steam brush your face, while you observe the choreography unfolding around you. Conversations intersect like overlapping melodies. A man in a grey suit complains about rationing. A woman in a patterned dress recounts a bureaucratic mishap involving permits and long queues. An older gentleman mutters into his newspaper about the state of modern art. All of them believe their grievances deserve to be recorded somewhere. You, seated quietly among them, know better than anyone how flimsy such records truly are. A small bell above the door jingles, and you lift your eyes without moving your head. A man steps in, one you've seen before. His coat is plain, but his posture is rehearsed, and his gaze scans the room with the kind of casual diligence that never fully achieves casualness. You do not acknowledge him. Instead, you take another slow sip of your coffee and study the swirl of foam as though it held your entire attention. He chooses a seat several tables away. It is neither near nor far, exactly the kind of placement that allows for accidental glances, accidental departures, accidental mentions of shared acquaintances. You've been expecting him, but expectation is a private thing, not to be shown. He orders tea, which he never drinks. You note it without interest. Rituals have their own purpose in your world, and even the smallest gesture can carry a quiet meaning. A new group enters the cafe, factory workers with heavy coats and heavier voices. They take a table near the door and fill the air with rough laughter. Their presence shifts the tone of the room. Scholars grow quieter, clerks sit straighter, and the older patrons look mildly annoyed, as though volume itself were a kind of ideological disrespect. But you welcome the noise. It creates a buffer, a layer of unpredictable texture over which your subtler tasks can easily disappear. You glance at your watch not because you need to, but because the gesture fits naturally into the role you play. Your companion across the room will interpret the motion as readiness. He adjusts his sleeve in response, revealing a glimpse of paper tucked into the lining. To anyone else, it looks like nothing. A frayed seam, perhaps, or the corner of a receipt. You recognize it for what it is, an offering disguised as a flaw. He will leave it on a chair when he gets up. You will retrieve it 15 minutes later, when the cafe grows crowded enough to hide the exchange. No drama, no signals, just quiet compliance with the invisible laws you both obey. A woman passes your table carrying a plate of pastries. The scent of butter and vanilla mixes with the cigarette smoke, forming an unlikely harmony. She stops at a nearby table, setting down the plate with the elegance of someone who understands that even small gestures can be ceremonial. You watch her hands, steady, capable, unhurried. People like her build the rhythm of the city, unaware that they are the true keepers of its heartbeat. Across from you, a young couple argues in hushed tones. Their quarrel is domestic, wrapped in tenderness and irritation in equal measure. They seem to believe the entire cafe is listening, though no one is. People imagine their personal dramas radiate outward, when in truth most lives fade quietly without public witness. You enjoy observing these small illusions. They remind you how much of the world depends on the stories people tell themselves. Your contact rises. He leaves his untouched tea on the table and slips out the door with the same ordinary pace he used to enter. No one watches him leave. No one notices the scrap of paper now lying beneath his chair. You let the moment pass untouched. You stare at your empty cup for a few more breaths, then signal the waiter for another. Patience is the currency in your line of work, and you spend it freely. While you wait for the second cup, you turn your attention back to the room. A soldier sits at the bar, his uniform freshly pressed, boots polished to a dull shine. He speaks to the bartender with a solemnity reserved for people who have accepted a narrative but not its consequences. His voice carries fragments of pride and doubt intertwined, the way flags and shadows might overlap in strong wind. You listen without judgment. Most people inhabit contradictions gently, unaware of the fraying edges. Your new coffee arrives, warmer and richer than the first. You sip it slowly, letting its heat loosen the stiffness in your shoulders. The moment feels suspended, not tense, simply precise, like the bow of a string instrument settling before the next note. When the cafe grows busier, the atmosphere thickens with sound. Chairs scrape across the floor. Someone laughs loudly at a joke you do not hear. A spoon clatters onto a saucer. The scent of cigarettes deepens. All of it becomes a kind of shelter, a cocoon woven from noise and steam, inside which small transactions can pass undetected. You finish your drink, set the coins on the table with casual indifference, and stand. As you bend to adjust your coat, your hand closes around the folded scrap beneath the empty chair. It vanishes into your pocket with the same quiet certainty as a breath disappearing into winter air. You step outside again, and the city greets you with its muted evening light. The cafe door shuts behind you, muffling the clatter and chatter into a soft hum. The rhythm of footsteps draws you forward once more, and you merge with the flow of strangers who carry their own secrets, unaware that yours has just changed hands. The street stretches ahead, patient and unhurried, guiding you deeper into the great quiet performance you call a life. The street absorbs the last of the cafe's warmth as you step into the open air. Evening has gathered itself into a soft shawl spread across the city, wrapping the rooftops in a gentle dusk. Lamps glow with a tired yellow hue, and the faint tremor of distant machinery hums through the air like a background chorus. Your steps fall into the natural rhythm of the settling day, unhurried, deliberate, as though the entire city has agreed to soften its breath. You move toward quieter streets, the ones built before anyone imagined ideology could shape a map. Narrow facades lean close to one another, sharing warmth through old brick and older memories. These alleys are where conversations travel best, carried by angles and echoes that betray even the softest secrets. You have walked them often, not out of necessity alone, but because listening here feels almost effortless, like the city itself assists you. You pause near a lamppost whose light flickers only when the wind pushes, just so. Beneath it, a small newsstand is closing for the night. The vendor stacks papers with slow, tired motions, humming a tune that has no beginning or end. You lean casually against a wall, hands in your pockets, looking like someone waiting for a friend who is running late. People rarely question waiting. They project their own stories onto it and move on. Nearby, two clerks from a ministry building are deep in conversation. Their voices blend with the rustle of newspapers and the rustling of coats, but certain phrases lift themselves from the murmur with surprising clarity. They are discussing shortages, not the dramatic kind that would alarm a nation, but the mundane inconveniences that occupy bureaucratic minds. Their whispers carry the tone of conspirators, though their grievances are nothing more than staff room complaints, inflated by a sense of self-importance. You let their words drift to you without appearing to care. Listening is never about straining. It is about positioning. Sound behaves like water in these streets. It flows along predictable paths, settling into corners, slipping beneath door frames, gathering in open spaces. You've learned how subtle shifts in posture can turn your ear into a receiving instrument. Tilt your head a degree too far and you look curious. Keep your chin too still and you look guarded. The balance is almost an art form. The clerks finish their conversation and disperse into the night. You push away from the wall, stepping into the slow current of pedestrians moving homeward. Their conversations overlap in soft layers. A woman bargaining with herself over what to cook for dinner. Two teenagers whispering about a teacher. An old man muttering nostalgic fragments to no one in particular. You absorb these voices like notes in an endless composition, not for their content, but for the way they paint a portrait of the city's inner life. At a street corner framed by shuttered shops, a tram rattles past. Its passengers are pressed close, their breath fogging the windows. You watch the blur of faces and imagine the quiet dramas unfolding behind the glass. Every person carries their own narrative, though most of those narratives would bore the world if spoken aloud. That truth has always amused you, how people guard their stories as though they were precious, when most stories are simply human and therefore predictable. You walk on, guided by a kind of instinctual cartography of sound. You know which alleys amplify whispers, which stairwells echo too much, which courtyards create natural chambers of acoustics. One courtyard, tucked behind an administrative building, is especially generous. The archway funnels sound toward anyone who stands just beneath it, a quirk of architecture that transforms even casual exchanges into audible clarity. You pass beneath that arch now, pretending to examine a notice board plastered with aging posters. Behind you, two men talk in low voices. Their conversation is coded not by design, but by habit, bureaucrats adopting secrecy as a form of ego rather than necessity. You catch fragments, a supervisor's misstep, a procurement delay, the exaggerated gravity of insignificant failures. You smile faintly, not at their troubles, but at their certainty that someone must be listening. They are half right. People whisper most fervently when the stakes are low. Whispering makes them feel consequential. You've learned that whispered nonsense can be more revealing than shouted truths. It is not the content that matters, but the instinct behind it. Fear, pride, envy, desire. Those instincts are the real signals. Information is a shadow cast by human nature. The last shades of daylight withdraw, leaving the city in the full embrace of night. You make your way toward a neighborhood where tall residential buildings cast long geometric shadows. Laundry lines hang overhead like thin borders between worlds. A woman leans from her window, lowering a basket to a waiting friend below. Their voices float down in soft conversation, their phrases carried cleanly through the still air. You catch only a handful of words, yet their tone reveals more than the vocabulary. Affection layered with resignation, a shared frustration softened by routine. It is astonishing how much people reveal unintentionally. The voice you hear most often is the one they didn't mean to project. You turn into a small park lit by dim lanterns. The benches are worn, their paint cracked and peeling. A statue of some long-forgotten reformer stands at the centre, pigeons roosting on his shoulders like ironic accolades. Children's chalk drawings faintly decorate the pavement, pastel ghosts of earlier hours. The park is empty, except for an elderly man feeding breadcrumbs to the last stubborn birds of the evening. He talks to himself as he tosses the crumbs, recounting a story about rationing in the old days. He speaks with the confidence of someone who believes his memories hold the key to understanding the present. You listen from a distance, not for intelligence, but because his voice reveals how history becomes softer and more flattering the longer people carry it. He edits his recollections as he speaks, pruning them to fit the narrative he prefers. You find this endearing. Memory is the most loyal liar we possess. As you leave the park, the sound of footsteps approaches from behind. A woman with a shopping bag hurries past you, muttering about long queues and cold hallways. Her voice bounces off the narrow walls of the surrounding buildings, making her frustration sound like a public announcement. She glances at you without recognition and continues on. You watch her disappear around the corner, her words still echoing faintly. You follow the echoes until they dissolve into the general thrum of the night. In this quieter district, sound does not scatter. It accumulates. Through open windows, lives spill outward. The scrape of a chair on linoleum, a radio playing a sentimental song, the clatter of dishes washed after dinner. None of these details matter in the official sense, yet they form the backdrop against which nations shape their careful narratives. Intelligence work is often painted as a dance of danger and intrigue, but more often it resembles listening to the world breathe. You stop near a building with peeling paint and a narrow stairwell leading down to a basement tavern. Faint laughter bubbles up from below. The acoustics of the stairwell funnel the sound upward, carrying fragments of arguments about sports, politics, and whether someone's cousin has found a better paying job. The participants speak with theatrical intensity, their opinions inflated by the slant of alcohol. You stand just close enough to capture tone without needing to decipher words. People love to confide in shadows. They mistake darkness for privacy. The tavern door swings open, releasing a warm burst of voices. Two men emerge, each supporting the other's attempts at dignity. Their laughter is loose, spilling freely into the air. One of them waves his hand dramatically, proclaiming a secret he insists must never be repeated. You catch the phrasing, a rumour about a supervisor's misbehaviour. It is the sort of rumour that will spread rapidly tomorrow, passed along as confidential truth by people who crave the thrill of possessing forbidden knowledge. Secrets, you've learned, are rarely about danger. They are about status. You walk until the noise fades behind you, replaced by the softer soundscape of residential calm. A cat stalks across the pavement, pausing to study you with an expression of mild judgment. You slow your pace to avoid startling it. The air carries the faint scent of smoke from a distant chimney, mingling with the metallic tang of the tram lines overhead. Eventually you reach a street where the buildings form a narrow corridor. The acoustics here are remarkable. Voices travel the length of the street with surprising clarity. A couple argues gently near a doorway, their disagreement more affectionate than hostile. Their words matter less than the cadence, which reveals the comfort of long familiarity. You let their voices accompany your steps until they fade. Further along, you hear the click of heels approaching. A woman in a dark coat passes you, whispering fiercely into her scarf about something someone said at the office. Her tone swells with a sense of personal tragedy, though her grievance is trivial. She glances at you without recognition, assuming you are too occupied with your own world to have heard anything. She is correct in a way. You heard the feelings, not the facts. Most people offer their truths freely, by accident. All you need to do is stand where the sound chooses to go. The night deepens, and the city quiets by degrees. You slow your steps, savouring the tail end of the day's voices as they soften into silence. Listening has filled your pockets with small observations. Nothing dramatic, nothing that will change the course of nations by itself. Yet these fragments matter in their own way. They reveal the currents beneath the surface, the human impulses that shape decisions long before ideology takes credit. You make your way home without hurry, carrying the gentle hum of the city with you. Through practice, through patience, through the careful art of standing just beyond notice, you have learned more about people by listening than most learn by speaking. You understand the strange truth that governs this work. The loudest secrets are the ones whispered for effect, and the quiet ones are the only truths worth keeping. You step into the shadowed calm of your building, letting the city's murmurs settle behind you. Like the final notes of a long, unhurried song, you wake with a faint impression of the city's last murmur still in your ears, as if the night left a soft aftertaste. The day arranges itself into small necessities. A coat, a hat, a scarf folded just so. You tuck a slim notebook into the inner pocket of your coat, its pages thin and stained with previous winters. It is less a diary than a ledger of carefully managed possibilities. Each entry is written in a hand practiced until it is almost indifferent to the emotion behind the words. Steady, economical, polite. You have always favoured that kind of handwriting. It is the tone people assume when they wish to be believed. Paper is absurdly permanent for something so small. A scrap can journey farther than a body, survive rain and tram wheels, be passed through many hands before someone finally decides to read it. You prepare a few such scraps now, a folded rectangle of official-looking stationery with a brief phrase typed in the indifferent font of bureaucracy, a strip of newspaper with a circled paragraph and a phone number hidden beneath a fold, a tiny square of onion skin paper on which a neat set of initials sits like a fingerprint. Writing them is a ritual. You press the pen with the same rhythm every time, lift it, fold the paper along the same line. The motions become a mantra, calming the small restlessness that likes to live behind your ribs. You leave the warmth of home and step into the city, which has already begun to shrug awake. The air is lean and metallic this morning, carrying a faint scent of coal and the distant tang of the river. You walk without haste, because haste calls attention. You look like everyone else who walks these streets, purposeful enough to appear engaged, subtle enough to remain anonymous. Your first drop is a wooden bench beneath a chestnut tree in a small square. The bench is hollowed where the wood has been worn thin, and that hollow is exactly the sort of place a hurried passerby will not inspect. You slide the folded rectangle into that hollow and press it home with the heel of your hand so that it sits flush and unreadable to casual fingers. Then you settle on the bench as if for a rest, mid-morning sun reaching for your face. A boy darts by with a football and nearly trips. An old woman feeds crumbs to a pigeon. The square of paper is invisible to all of them. To you, it is a quiet promise. Someone who knows this bench will find the message in time, and the time matters less than the fact of exchange. There is a delicate comedy in the reverence people impart to paper. Exchange a scrap, and you've committed them to a drama they imagine heroic. An envelope can become a verdict, a folded note, a manifesto. You've seen dispatches treated like relics, read aloud in rooms with heavy curtains and heavier egos. Often, these scraps confirm nothing more than a name, or the time of a meeting, or a rumour someone else started to feel important. Yet the world, the official machinery of suspicion and calculation, magnifies them until the scrap becomes a pivot around which decisions are justified. You move through the city, leaving these small artifacts in places where ordinary living brushes them into circulation. A coat pocket on a bench, the spine of a public phone book, a hollow under the steps of a bakery where the dough slaps like a heartbeat, the fold of a newspaper left face down on a cafe table. You enjoy how easily the city participates. It hides things in its own folds without complaint. The architecture is complicit, offering the hollow of a bench, the loose flap of a drain pipe, the the seam in a lamppost. Even the citizens act as unwitting custodians, carrying items without thinking of their new weight. Sometimes the notes are elaborate, coded phrases, initials that match two different calendars, a vertical line that means safe. Often they are painfully mundane. A street name, a time, a remark about a train's delay. You write so that the words fit the expectation of secrecy, short, plausible, and never sentimental. The less poetry there is, the more they believe in the necessity of the message. It is a kind of reverse magic. Plainness makes it seem precious. You have cultivated techniques that turn ordinary gestures into secure exchanges. A stray cough at a tram stop means wait. A hand smoothing an overcoat reveals a hidden corner where paper might nest. A remark about the weather signals not tonight. The world around you is a language of movements, and you have become fluent in its grammar. It is not that you distrust words. It is that people trust words too often, and trust easily. So you make do with objects instead, letting ink speak while bodies go on pretending to be merely present. One day, your transfer is a postcard tucked into the hollow of a public bench beneath the university steps. The postcard bears an image of a distant coastline, its colours pale from time and handling. On the back is a single line, 2 on Wednesday. Nothing about it dramatises danger. It simply narrows choices in a way only those accustomed to small precisions appreciate. A student sits on the same bench and opens a book, not noticing the postcard, until he leans his elbow in the exact place you anticipated. He moves, the paper catches, and a routine unfolds. He slides the card into his bag, thinking it a stray advertisement. In a pocket, it waits its turn. Weeks later, it will be seen and act as an excuse for a meeting. You marvel sometimes at how often chance and intention conspire in gentle ways. Your handwriting remains steady. That steadiness is a kind of courtesy. It calms the person who will read it and prepares them to act without fuss. You prefer script that is legible enough to be read at a glance, but careful enough to suggest deliberation. Once you tried to write with flourished secrecy, elaborate swirls and cryptic punctuation, and a hurried courier misread a single curve. The error cost a rendezvous. Simplicity makes fewer mistakes. On another afternoon, you slip a folded slip into the seam of a newspaper left at a tram depot. The paper is damp at the edges from the morning's drizzle. Ink softens when men carry it without thinking. Later, a clerk will fold that paper and carry it into a meeting as proof of public sentiment. He will glance at the circled line you left and decide, briefly, that something significant must be at play. He will speak, and others will nod, and the scrap will swell into a momentary certainty. You grin privately at the absurdity. A newsprint margin has altered a conversation about supply chains. The world is built on such comic escalations. You are not immune to the small theatrics of your trade. Sometimes you leave a note, wrapped in a cigarette paper, or folded into a matchbox. Once, pressured by an editor's slant, you used a sheet of school exercise paper and scribbled in a childish hand to make the message seem trivial. Each disguise is a playful act of mimicry. Yet you resist melodrama. Your work depends on the ordinary pretending to be exceptional. You cultivate the illusion as an artisan might stitch a seam. Invisibility is sewn with humility. People treat the notes as if they were proof of fate. You have watched vaunted officials receive a scrap and react with the reverence reserved for proclamations. They read a line and posture themselves into policy, as if the paper has granted them access to destiny. Often the scrap simply confirms what the receiving ear already suspected. Confirmation comforts the proud. You have learned to exploit that comfort sparingly. Overuse dulls its effect, and the machinery of paranoia is not easily resharpened once blunted. There is in the exchange of paper a gentle comedy. Sometimes the messages circulate until they return to you, changed by hands that feel empowered by erasure or annotation. A note you left at dawn might reappear in the lining of your own coat an hour later, the ink faded but the handwriting recognizable. It is as if the city recycles its secrets to see which ones will hold. You have grown fond of such returns. They are the city's way of saying it noticed. Not all the scraps carry instructions. Some are small proofs, tokens of human longing that find your pocket by accident. A torn receipt with a different name stamped in the corner. A child's folded paper boat, mislaid on a rain-sleek bench. A note in a foreign hand asking for help. These are not intelligence. They are the everyday evidence of lives continuing, despite the larger stories others try to tell. You keep a few of these personal artifacts in a drawer at home, not because they are useful, but because they remind you that people make history in ways that feel soft and close. By evening, you have left dozens of small traces scattered through the city, crumbs of information, not quite weighty enough to move mountains, but useful in the aggregate. In each exchange, there is the same quiet ritual. Fold, inscribe, hide, walk away. The act itself calms you. It is less about the message and more about the choreography of trust. You are, in a way, a midwife to the city's private dramas, helping births of meetings and misunderstandings alike. You return home with ink on your fingers and the city's odour of coal and brass clinging to your coat. You empty your pockets on the table and arrange the day's returned items. A newspaper flap, a postcard, a matchbox, none of them feels especially heroic. They are ordinary objects doing extraordinary jobs because people insist on giving them meaning. You sit by the window, turning a scrap between your fingers. Outside, the tram lights move like slow planets. The day settles into the hush of evening. Passing notes has the rhythm of a lullaby built from other people's ordinary noises, a sound that comforts because it keeps the night predictable. You have been living between truths and the appearances of truth for so long that the act of folding paper feels more honest than any proclamation you've heard. There is a small private humour in all of it, that history will call some of these scraps intelligence and others garbage, and that both categories are, in practice, decided by the loudest mouths in the room. You smile to yourself, fold the day's remaining scrap into the neat third, and place it in the drawer beside the ledger. In the quiet that follows, you understand the modest achievement of your life. To be useful without spectacle. To be necessary within an economy that pretends not to need you. You close the window against the night and let the city keep its own small secrets. Tomorrow, you will step back into the flow and begin folding paper again, because the world insists on telling itself stories, and you, unheroic and steady, help it along with ink and silence. Evening settles over the city with the unhurried certainty of something that has done this many times before. The sky dims into a muted violet, and the lights in the apartment stairwells blink awake one by one. Your footsteps echo softly as you return home, keys clicking in your pocket with a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial. The day's exchanges, the slips of paper, the silent nods, the half-hidden glances, settle into the folds of your coat, invisible and weightless. And yet they follow you indoors like the scent of the street. Your room greets you with the same quiet neutrality it always does, a space that has learned not to ask questions. The desk waits near the window, its surface a communally shared borderland between modest domesticity and the quieter business your life requires. A lamp holds its amber glow ready, the switch stiff from years of cautious use. You shrug off your coat and let it rest on the back of the chair. Dust motes rise with your movement, drifting in the slanted glow like faint flecks of old paper. For a moment you stand there, observing the stillness of the room, the way the shadows gather in corners as though they've been saving you a place. Then you sit, and the day's true work begins. You open the top drawer of the desk. Inside lie the tools of your stranger livelihood, maps folded So many times their creases form new borders, notebooks filled with symbols that make sense only in certain light, a small tin box containing strips of paper, each bearing a few letters that look like nonsense until arranged by a patient hand. You remove the stack of encoded messages collected through the week, ordinary-looking clippings, receipts, and scraps whose significance hides in the way they refuse to speak plainly. Their meaning is not urgent, not dramatic. There is no ticking clock, no chase, only the gentle, persistent insistence of work that must be done, because a system somewhere expects it. Decoding, at its heart, is an act of listening to what paper refuses to declare. You spread the slips before you. Most are simple substitution ciphers, letters standing in for other letters, as though language needed masks to feel interesting. You begin the methodical process of unmasking them. The routine almost soothes you. Your pencil glides across the paper with steady strokes crossing out symbols, writing small notations in the margins. As you work, you feel that familiar, slightly bemused awareness. Humans adore puzzles. They trust complicated systems more than simple truths. If a message arrives in clear, direct language, people doubt it. But wrap it in encryption, even the flimsiest encryption, and suddenly it feels powerful. People are more willing to believe a ghost story when it's whispered behind their back. One message decodes into an observation about train schedules. Another becomes a vague remark about a meeting location. A third, which probably took someone half an hour to encode awkwardly in the margins of a theatre programme, reveals itself to be merely a confirmation that the weather will be cold next week. You sit back and exhale softly, unable to stop a wry smile from forming. How many people in this city go to great effort each day to create secrets that would evaporate if said aloud? Even the most banal human concerns become a form of intrigue when written in cipher. It is the Cold War's quiet joke. Entire networks mobilise to share information any street vendor could guess by watching the sky or the trams. You turn to the maps next. Each one is a testament to someone's earnest attempt to capture the world in ink. They spread before you like flawed promises, rail lines that shift depending on which ministry printed them, neighbourhoods whose boundaries contradict each other depending on the month, a factory that appears in one map and disappears entirely in another. Reality bends itself around political convenience, and the maps follow suit, reshaped as needed. You smooth the closest one flat, running your hand over its surface, as though calming a restless animal. Red pencil marks trace routes that no longer exist, or perhaps never did. Blue arrows indicate movement patterns someone thought logical. Yellow dots send you in search of places that have changed names more often than you've changed addresses. Following these maps is like chasing a rumour. It always leads somewhere, but rarely where intended. You trace a line from a northern tram station to a warehouse by the river. The map insists. The street between them is straight and well lit. You know from experience that it winds like a drunken corridor and contains two dead ends not marked on any official sheet. Another line on the map shows a direct route between the printing office and a public library. Yet the street has been closed for construction for 6 months. The map pretends not to know this. You suspect the ministry pretends as well. Paper is patient. It waits for humans to catch up to reality, and humans rarely do. You take a moment to stretch your neck, letting the muscles loosen. Outside your window, the street glows under the lamp's soft halos. Someone walks past carrying a loaf of bread wrapped in thin paper. A dog barks once and is answered by its own echo. Cars rumble in the distance, like tired giants turning in their sleep. You return to the desk and lift another map, this one older. The edges are frayed, and the ink has faded to a gentle sepia. You prefer these older ones. Their inaccuracies feel more honest, though they never pretended to know the city fully. They show trolley lines that no longer run, gardens that were swallowed by concrete, and old borders the government has tried to forget. Looking at them is like holding the city's dream rather than its current demands. Where the new maps impose certainty, the old ones admit the world shifts without asking permission. You pencil a few notes into the margins, linking locations mentioned in the day's decoded messages. The connections are vague, sometimes they mean nothing, sometimes everything. It is impossible to tell which in advance. That is the quiet absurdity of this work. Meaning exists only because someone decides it must. You sigh softly and begin the next cipher, the letters arranged in deliberate disarray. The first few substitutions reveal a familiar pattern. The writer likes to disguise important words by placing them at the center of the message, wrapped in irrelevant details. You unravel it slowly, like untangling a thread from an old jacket. The resulting message, a reminder. He prefers the western entrance now. You sit back in your chair. Someone across the city spent a train ride hiding that sentence in a labyrinth of coded symbols. The level of effort stands in disproportion to its meaning. But this disproportion defines the era. People feel safer when complexity shields their choices, even if the complexity is entirely self-made. Sometimes you wonder whether the Cold War is fueled less by conflict and more by the human craving for significance. A coded message gives a person the sensation of being indispensable. A map with careful circles and arrows makes someone feel like a strategist. And decoding them, that quiet, tedious labour, becomes a kind of pilgrimage toward clarity that no one will publicly admit they never reach. You close the final notebook and lean back, letting your eyes wander around your small apartment. The walls hold the memory of years shaped by quiet labour, the kind that rarely earns acknowledgement, but keeps entire systems functioning. There is a peculiar comfort in the anonymity of it all. You do not choose the direction of history. You simply document its misalignments. Your fingers rest on the stack of maps, and you notice one corner curling upward. You press it down gently. Maps always resist confinement. They want to unfold, stretch themselves across tables, demand attention. Only when folded do they resemble something manageable. And even then, you know that inside each fold lies a world that refuses exactness. You think of the messages hidden earlier today, the ones tucked into benches and newspapers. Those scraps will be unfolded by hands that expect revelation. Their authors will believe they have contributed something essential. Their readers will nod with grave expression, as people often do when they hope to seem insightful. You chuckle softly. The laugh is small, warm, amused, rather than bitter. Humans cannot resist the temptation to turn the ordinary into the monumental. Codes, maps, intelligence reports, all of them are attempts to inflate the mundane into something that feels worthy of effort. And perhaps that is not foolish at all. Perhaps the real absurdity lies in how much comfort these complicating rituals provide. You gather the papers into neat stacks, each pile a silent witness to the theatre of interpretation. The lamp casts a gentle circle of light around your hands. Outside, the city sinks deeper into its nightly quiet. The world continues, unbothered by your work, yet strangely dependent on it. As you close the drawer, you feel the familiar calm that follows hours of careful thinking. The absurdity, once noticed, becomes endearing. You have become a custodian of complexity, not because the world needs it, but because people feel safer believing that someone, somewhere, understands the threads they keep weaving. You stand, stretch, and turn off the lamp. The room plunges into soft shadow. Maps rest in their drawers. The codes sleep until morning. And you, the quiet interpreter of a restless era, step into the dim hallway with the steady grace of someone who has learned to live comfortably with contradictions written in ink. The evening folds itself neatly behind you, as you pass through streets where the lamps burn low and the windows glow with the modest softness of occupied rooms. Your steps carry the faint residue of ink and paper from earlier, the quiet fatigue that comes from deciphering other people's attempts at importance. The air has cooled, carrying with it the scent of rain that may or may not arrive. You walk with the deliberate aimlessness of someone who does not wish to be traced by purpose. The neighbourhood you move through is unremarkable in its architecture. 4-story buildings with chipped plaster, narrow balconies cluttered with flower pots and forgotten laundry. But one doorway among these many holds a key you carry in your pocket, wrapped in a piece of cloth to mute its outline. This building is the sort of structure bureaucrats never notice and pedestrians never admire. In other words, a perfect hiding place, precisely because it offers nothing worth hiding. You enter quietly, allowing the door to close without a sound. The stairwell smells faintly of old linoleum and a cleaning solution mixed too weakly to do much good. You climb slowly, not out of caution, but out of a strange respect for the building's weary bones. Each step up the narrow stair feels like a conversation with time, as though the structure has been waiting decades for someone to acknowledge its effort to remain standing. On the 3rd floor, you turn down a dim corridor and stop before a door with peeling paint and a tarnished number plate. You unlock it using a practiced motion, as though your hand knows the sequence better than your mind does. The door opens inward, releasing a faint exhale of stale air, the stored breath of days when no one entered. Inside, the safe house is exactly as you left it. The curtains hang unevenly, one side shorter by an inch, as if measuring imperfection. The wallpaper is yellowed at the edges, peeling back in spots like a memory refusing to hold its shape. The scent of dust mingles with the faint sweetness of old wood. The floorboards creak as you walk, each grown a small announcement to the quiet room that it has company again. Safe houses are known for their lack of personality, but this one has accumulated the sort of accidental character that emerges from disuse. A mismatched chair sits beneath the window, one leg slightly shorter than the others. A kettle waits on a stove older than most of the city's current officials. A narrow bed occupies the corner with the humility of furniture that knows it is temporary, even when people pretend otherwise. You place your satchel on the table and remove the notebook you used earlier. The pages carry the faint crinkle of repeated unfolding. You set it aside without opening it. Tonight is not a night for decoding or map tracing, or the kind of mental acrobatics that turns small scraps into official conclusions. Tonight belongs to a different rhythm. You move about the room, performing the small rituals of settling in, checking the lock, testing the window latch, adjusting the curtain so that the street lamp outside does not shine directly into the room. These motions are mechanical, not out of paranoia, but routine. You have done them so many times that they feel as natural as breathing. The kettle accepts water with a hollow echo and soon begins its slow heating. You sit in the chair by the window while you wait, watching the exterior world through the thin fabric of the curtain. Across the street, a man emerges from a building holding a paper bag. He walks with the resigned determination of someone acquiring groceries after a long day. A passing bus briefly swallows him in its reflection, then reveals him again, smaller now against the darkening pavement. People outside continue their small lives, unaware of the stories being written in shadowed rooms like yours. You take some comfort in this. You have found that anonymity is not just a consequence of your work, it is an unexpected refuge. To be unknown in a world obsessed with being noticed is its own peculiar relief. The kettle whistles softly, and you pour hot water over tea leaves that have lost much of their fragrance. The resulting brew is weak, but the warmth is pleasant as it settles into your palms. You drink slowly, letting the steam rise and soften the air around you. The bed with its thin mattress creaks as you sit on the edge. The springs inside shift in protest, arguing with your weight before accepting it. Safe houses are always furnished with beds that seem to have lived more interesting lives than their occupants. This one is no exception. The blanket smells faintly of old cupboards, the scent of wool that has endured many seasons of neglect. Despite the room's quiet, your mind does not entirely rest. Safe houses promise physical protection, but they do not silence thought. The absence of danger amplifies the internal noise. You lean back against the wall, feeling the roughness of the wallpaper against your shoulder, and you let your thoughts drift as they wish. You think of the coded notes scattered across the city, now circulating through pockets and drawers and bureaucratic hands. You think of the maps folded into your desk at home, each one promising accuracy it cannot provide. You think of the messages you have written, their neat handwriting bearing more weight in the imagination of others than in reality. In a place like this, where silence hangs like a curtain, these reflections stretch out and occupy the room. You stretch your legs, listening to the floor's slow complaint beneath you. The room settles with you, adjusting to your presence. Outside, the occasional sound from the street reaches your ears. A barking dog, a bicycle bell, a door slamming somewhere in the distance. These noises enter the safe house without invitation, creating a soft soundtrack to your solitude. You stand and walk toward the small kitchen area. Safe houses always include the basics: a kettle, a spoon, a chipped bowl, and cutlery that never matches. You run your fingers along the counter, feeling the dust that has collected like fine ash. You wipe it with your sleeve and watch the small cloud rise, illuminated by the weak light from the hallway. The safe house holds no photographs, no books, no personal traces. Yet it remembers things in its own way: scuff marks on the floor left by hurried footsteps, cigarette burns near the window from restless hands, faint stains on the wall where someone once leaned too heavily. These remnants are not evidence of danger. They are signs of lives lived in the margins. You return to the window, the tea now gone. Outside, the street grows quieter. Cars pass less frequently. People hurry toward warmth. The city inhales, preparing itself for the long, lingering hours of night. You sit on the bed and lie back slowly. The mattress accepts your weight reluctantly, then holds it as if uncertain how long you intend to stay. The ceiling above you is cracked in a few places, thin lines that resemble the design of an unfinished map. You trace them with your eyes, imagining how they would look if they led somewhere meaningful. In safe houses, imagination becomes louder. You hear echoes from earlier, voices from the cafe, footsteps near the stairwell, the gentle rustle of paper. Memory has a way of becoming magnified when the room itself refuses to offer distraction. You breathe in, letting the air fill you with its mixture of dust and worn fabric. Despite the room's neglect, there is a strange comfort in its stillness. It holds you the way an old coat holds warmth, imperfectly but sincerely. Your thoughts drift to an irony you've always carried lightly, that you live a life dedicated to creating illusions of certainty while spending your nights in places that feel transient, improvised, forgotten. Safe houses promise protection, but offer only space. They shelter your body, but leave your mind to wander through its own corridors. You close your eyes. The sounds from the streets soften into a distant hum. The floor creaks, adjusting once more. Somewhere in the building, a pipe releases a slow, steady drip. You imagine the water moving through the structure, tracing its own secret route in the walls. Your breathing deepens, settling into the rhythm the night encourages. These rooms, you know, will never feel like home. Their safety is thin and practical, not comforting. Yet you return to them because they are predictable in a world built from uncertainties. Their stillness offers a kind of invitation, not to rest but to pause. And so you lie there, in the dim glow of the safe house, listening to your own thoughts drift like dust in the slanted light. The quiet keeping watch in a way no person ever could. You wake before dawn has finished deciding how pale it wants to be, the soft hush of the safe house still clinging to your thoughts. The room with its uneven walls and stale air says nothing as you gather your things. You close the door with the silent precision the place has taught you, leaving behind the creaking bed and its fragile attempt at comfort. The corridor greets you with its familiar dimness, a grey hallway that seems to exist outside time. Descending the narrow stairs, you feel the building exhale one last sigh, as though relieved that you are taking your quiet burdens elsewhere for now. The street outside is cool, washed in early light. A faint mist rises from the cobblestones, as if the city is slowly shrugging awake. You begin walking. Your steps echo softly between apartment blocks, whose windows reflect the pale morning. You pull your coat a little tighter and watch the shapes of the city sharpen as the light steadies. Everything is ordinary. The trash truck rumbling at the corner, a milkman unloading bottles with a gentle clink, a cyclist gliding past with a scarf trailing behind him. Nothing about the scene is particularly remarkable, yet you feel a presence stitched into the empty air, a quiet certainty that you do not walk these streets alone. The first camera sits above a bakery door, its glass eye fixed in a permanent half blink, as though tired of seeing the same customers purchase the same bread. You nod at it internally, not out of fear, but acknowledgement. Its purpose is clear, to remind you that someone, somewhere, has decided that vigilance is a virtue. You find this oddly comforting. In a life where you exist between shadows, being observed offers a peculiar form of validation. Further down the street, another camera perches atop a lamp post, disguised as part of a traffic monitor. It pivots slowly, surveying the intersection with the patience of a creature that does not need rest. You let your steps fall in rhythm with its movement, neither avoiding its gaze nor seeking it. The attention feels almost companionable, a silent witness to your quiet progress. People often talk about surveillance as though it is a net ready to tighten, but you have learned a quieter truth. Most watching is lazy. Cameras, like the people who manage them, drift in and out of focus. Their gaze is constant, but their interest is limited. They watch the way a tired librarian watches a reading room, aware of presence but rarely invested in detail. You walk through a street market, setting up for the day. Vendors arrange crates of produce beneath striped awnings, their hands moving with practiced speed. A butcher sharpens his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, the metallic rasp carrying through the air. The smell of onions, damp wood, and early coffee mingles in the breeze. Most of the stall owners ignore the cameras overhead, as though the machines had melted into the architecture. You walk among them, blending into the swirl of small negotiations and quiet routines. A woman selling eggs hums a tune older than the political slogans printed on the wall behind her. Her voice wavers off key, yet the melody carries a sincerity that no camera could ever interpret. Surveillance may record a scene, but it never captures the intention behind it. You pause near a fruit stall and examine a row of apples glistening under the morning light. You touch none of them. The gesture is simply part of your choreography, the art of belonging in a world that does not expect anything from you. A camera above the stall watches motionlessly. Its lens reflects the apples back at you, each one distorted into a tiny red lantern. You smile faintly. Watching machines have their blind spots. Human nature rarely does. Continuing onward, you drift toward a district where the buildings grow more severe, their facades stripped of ornament. The wide sidewalks and grey stone walls hold a certain austerity, as though designed to discourage lingering. Here the cameras appear more frequently, perched at fixed angles, as if trying to catalogue certainty in a world that refuses to offer any. You find yourself appreciating their predictability. Unlike people, cameras do not change moods, do not hold grudges, do not ask questions. that cannot be answered honestly. Their presence is a reminder that someone believes order can be preserved through attention alone. As flawed as that belief may be, it is a strangely endearing attempt. A bus sighs to a stop beside you, letting out a handful of passengers. Their faces hold the soft resignation of morning commitments. One man adjusts his tie with the severity of someone preparing to confront paperwork rather than enemies. You follow beside him for a moment, neither of you acknowledging the other. A camera on the building across the street tracks both of you in a slow arc. You imagine, briefly, the spectator behind the scenes, perhaps a bored operator in a dimly lit room, sipping weak tea and watching the city move without urgency. You wonder whether he assigns narratives to the shapes he sees, or whether he has grown accustomed to the endless parade of everyday lives. Perhaps he watches you sometimes and wonders what your routine is. Perhaps he thinks you are harmless. The notion is almost comforting. You continue walking. The sidewalk leads you toward a bridge overlooking the river. The water below moves silently, carrying flecks of sunlight and remnants of fallen leaves. A camera is mounted at the bridge's midpoint, monitoring both foot traffic and the slow drift of barges. You stop for a moment, resting your hands on the cold railing. The wind lifts your coat slightly, brushing it against your legs. From here, the city stretches outward, like a map slowly revealing itself. Factories on the horizon exhale faint plumes of smoke. Tram lines intersect like arteries. Apartment blocks rise in rows, each one holding hundreds of private worlds behind their curtained windows. Surveillance threads itself through all of this. Quietly, persistently, almost politely. You realize, not for the first time, how strange it is that the very act meant to limit freedom has become one of the few acknowledgements of your presence. In a city of strangers, it is the machines that notice you consistently. You leave the bridge and make your way into a quieter quarter. Trees line the street here, their branches brushing the rooftops like gentle fingers tracing memories. Children's chalk drawings sometimes appear on the pavement in this area, though the rain has washed most of them away. A camera sits high on a telephone pole, capturing a view of the street that includes you, the trees, and the soft blur of passing cars. You walk beneath it with the calm of someone who understands that being observed does not diminish your privacy. It merely changes its shape. There is a subtle freedom in not hiding. Transparency, in small doses, acts like a shield. People who believe they can see everything rarely bother to look deeper. You approach a courtyard where benches circle a dry fountain. Elderly residents gather here in the afternoons to exchange their carefully curated complaints and memories. The fountain is watched by a camera installed years ago, its lens now clouded with dust. Even in its weakened state, it observes the courtyard with dutiful stillness. You sit on one of the benches, letting the quiet settle around you. A few leaves scrape softly across the ground. A distant dog barks twice. The rhythm of the day slows, revealing the subtle tension between being seen and being understood. Surveillance sees your outline, your movement, your posture. It does not see your internal world, the unspoken questions, the dry humour that keeps you company, the small solitude you carry like an amulet. You lean back and watch the clouds shift across the sky. A thought drifts through your mind. Cameras misunderstand human beings, the same way maps misunderstand cities. Both of them capture shape, not substance. When you rise again, your joints stiff from the bench's unforgiving wood. The courtyard feels warmer. You walk toward a row of shops where the shopkeepers arrange their displays with the bored elegance of long practice. Another camera watches from the corner of a building, the lens tilted slightly downward, as if observing the pavement's imperfections. You turn into a side street, narrower and darker. The lamps here flicker inconsistently, their light trembling like a nervous pulse. You hear faint footsteps behind you. A boy running home, his bag thumping, against his side. He passes you without a glance. A camera above the door of a tailor's shop records both of you, its blinking light reflecting briefly in the boy's hair. The farther you walk, the quieter the city becomes. Surveillance remains present, but it grows gentler, more like a backdrop than an intrusion. You reach a corner where a small kiosk sells evening newspapers. The vendor, hands stained with ink, nods at you. A camera is perched above the kiosk, monitoring the transactions that unfold in their humble repetition. You buy nothing. You simply stand there for a moment, observing the way the street holds itself in this hour, balanced between motion and stillness, watched yet unburdened. Finally, you continue home. The day has stretched itself thin, retreating into the folds of late light. The cameras still blink, still bear witness, still perform their quiet duty. And as you walk, you find a peculiar calm settling within you, a steady rhythm, soft and sure, fed by the knowledge that someone, somewhere, believes your existence is worth observing, even if they never understand what they're seeing. Surveillance, you realize, is not a comfort because it protects you. It is a comfort because it notices you. And in a life built from shadows, noticing is its own fragile grace. The day unfolds into a muted, grey calm, a softness the city wears like an old coat, frayed at the seams yet still dignified. After wandering streets shaped by quiet observation, you eventually drift toward the district where transit lines converge like unravelling threads. The air there carries the smell of metal, oil, and a subtle nervousness woven into the fabric of human movement. You find yourself drawn to this place, not because you need to travel, but because travel in the Cold War age has rarely required distance. It merely requires performance. You cross through a plaza where pigeons gather at the feet of passers-by. A boy tosses crumbs, and the birds flock in patterns that look almost choreographed. Around the edges of the plaza, posters peel from the walls announcing regulations, cultural festivals, and proclamations penned in language that seems designed to be unread. Their stern fonts watch the world like unblinking guardians of order. The entrance to the train station yawns ahead, a cavern of echoing footsteps and murmured announcements. You step inside and feel the temperature shift, cooler, denser, carrying the scent of coal from locomotives waiting in distant bays. The ceiling arches upward in a sweep of iron and glass, a design intended to inspire awe, but now hosting a tired haze that blurs the light. You stand for a moment near the wall, hands in your coat pockets, letting the station's rhythms absorb you. The space is alive with the choreography of people who believe movement serves a purpose. Travellers clutch satchels, parcels, and identification papers. A soldier hurries past with a guarded expression, eyes scanning the hall, as if expecting the architecture itself to change shape. Vendors call out prices for pastries and cigarettes with a casual authority that transcends the supposed seriousness of the era. You drift toward one of the benches where the wood is polished smooth from years of restless waiting. Sitting here makes you feel like a passenger even when you have nowhere to go. A train roars past on a nearby track, its wheels singing against the rails in a rising metallic wail. The sound reverberates through your ribs. Commuters glance up, then back down to their papers and conversations, as if to confirm that nothing in their lives has been shifted by the roar. You feel that quiet contradiction again. The city insists on observation, yet misses almost everything of importance. A group of clerks lines up near the ticket booth, documents in hand. The clerk behind the counter stamps each booklet with a performance of authority, a series of rehearsed gestures meant to reassure the person receiving the stamp that their existence has been officially acknowledged. You watch the ritual unfold, aware that the ceremony matters far more than the truth behind it. Identity here is not a fact, it is a transaction. You rise and wander into the hallway that leads to the administrative wing of the station. a place half devoted to lost luggage and half devoted to confirming that the people passing through are who they claim to be. The two functions feel strangely related. The room is lined with wooden chairs, each one occupied by someone clutching papers with the reverence of a holy text. A man in a brown suit taps his foot anxiously, as though the stamping of his booklet will change the course of his life. A young woman sits with her hands folded neatly, rehearsing answers to questions no one will ask. Nearby, an older gentleman holds his passport like a fragile heirloom, willing it not to crumble in the hands of the inspector. You take a seat near the window, where pale light filters through frosted glass. The radiator beneath the sill groans with an intermittent clank, struggling to warm the air. Even the heating system feels like part of the bureaucracy, always present, rarely effective, yet indispensable in concept. An official enters the room with the solemn stride of someone auditioning for a role. His uniform is crisply pressed, but the collar sits unevenly, a sign that he dressed quickly or perhaps too rigidly. He calls names from a clipboard in a flat voice, each syllable stretched just slightly longer than necessary. You watch as people approach him with timid deference, handing over their documents like offerings to a minor deity. He examines each booklet intensely, flipping pages with a practiced skepticism. You can almost see the thoughts behind his eyes. The certainty that he has developed an instinct for deception, the belief that liars carry some visible mark he alone can perceive. You grant him this dignity silently, knowing the truth is far gentler and far more amusing. Almost everyone in this room is pretending in some way. Pretending to be confident, pretending to be patient, pretending that the identity printed on paper truly reflects the life carried in bones. When your turn comes, the official doesn't look up immediately. He takes your documents with a kind of theatrical indifference. His fingers press the edges of the papers, as though checking for hidden compartments. You resist the urge to smile. He asks a question so routine that it barely qualifies as language. You answer in a voice carefully tuned to quiet obedience, neither too steady nor too hesitant. He nods, flips a page, and scrutinizes the photograph that bears your face. His brow tightens slightly, not in suspicion, but in concentration, as though he expects your expression to reveal a confession. For a moment you observe him observing you. It is an odd intimacy, a stranger convinced he can decode your truth by studying the shade of ink behind your eyes. He stamps the booklet with a heavy thud, and the ink spreads like a small bruise across the page. Approved, validated, documented. A transformation on paper, while the person holding it remains unchanged. You thank him with a tone dipped in polite sincerity and step aside. Behind you, the next person rises with visible relief that their turn is approaching. You move back into the hallway, where the station hums with voices and shuffling feet. As you walk, you pass a large map mounted on the wall. Lines of coloured ink trace routes across the country, each one promising a journey that may or may not resemble reality. You study it briefly, not because you need direction, but because maps, especially official ones, embody the same contradiction as surveillance and identification. They assume the world can be understood through neat boundaries and confident labels. You begin to make your way toward the station cafe, following the scent of bitter coffee and worn upholstery. The cafe is a faded pocket of the station, its walls lined with photographs of locomotives that once looked modern. Travellers sit at small tables, staring into cups with the blank intensity of people suspended between destinations. You take a seat and rest your documents on the table. A waitress with tired eyes brings you coffee without being asked. She moves through the room with a lightness that comes not from joy, but from exhaustion, refined into habit. You wrap your hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into your fingers. Across the cafe, two men converse in hushed tones. Their briefcases are new, their coats immaculate. They speak with the casual gravity of people who believe their plans are shaping history. You listen to the cadence of their voices, not the words. The rhythm suggests certainty. The content, however, will almost certainly dissolve into irrelevance within the year. Outside the window, a train pulls into the station with a hiss. Its carriages lined with passengers, whose faces blur into a collective expression of anticipation. A porter waves his flag with ceremonial precision, as though signalling not a train but an idea of order. You drain your cup and stand. The station presses on around you, a living museum of identities in motion. You slip through the crowds and move toward the exit, feeling the shift in temperature as you step into the open air. Walking away from the station, you reflect on the gentle absurdity of it all. How borders can be crossed without stepping foot outside a building. How officials attempt to pass truth from expressions rehearsed in mirrors. How stamps and signatures transform ordinary people into something the state can measure. In your world, identity is not a fixed point. It is a performance repeated in waiting rooms and ticket lines, under the watchful eyes of machines and men alike. And as you walk into the settling quiet of the late afternoon, you feel the faintest hint of gratitude for the strange simplicity of it, the quiet comedy of being whoever the form expects, the freedom of belonging everywhere and nowhere, the soft, enduring truth that borders are often crossed long before anyone begins the journey. The day has thinned to a grey thread by the time you leave the district of stamps and signatures behind. The sky hovers in that borderland between late afternoon and early evening, unsure whether to commit to darkness. A damp breeze sweeps across the plaza, carrying hints of coming fog. You inhale slowly, feeling the faint sting of coal smoke settle in your lungs, a scent as familiar as the work you carry. You walk without urgency, letting the city's mood pull you forward. Buildings loom through the growing haze, their edges soften to watercolour shapes. The street lamps switch on one by one, their light pooling weakly on the pavement, as though unsure it is worth the effort. People pass you in scattered pairs or solitary strides, their outlines blurring into the mist. Their conversations travel only a short distance before dissolving, each word swallowed by the cold air. You feel the weight of the documents tucked inside your coat, not the physical weight. They consist of only a few thin pages, but the imagined importance assigned to them by others. The content is mild, observations recorded with the solemn belief that they hold influence. Routes, names, projections, suggestions, all framed with the vocabulary of consequence. You've held such papers countless times, though each one promises urgency the way a child promises adulthood, earnestly, but without understanding. The fog thickens as you turn onto a narrow street paved with uneven stones. They glisten with dampness, reflecting the dim light in trembling patches. A stray cat trots ahead of you, its outline flickering in and out of view. A bakery at the corner has already closed, but the smell of bread lingers in the air, clinging to the cold like a memory refusing to fade. You walk as though following an invisible thread, pulled taut through the city's quiet grid. There is no meeting at the end of this path, no coded exchange awaiting your arrival. You walk simply because movement helps you think, and tonight your thoughts feel denser than usual, like pages left to dry in a room without air. The truth sitting inside your coat pocket is unimpressive. It carries enough detail to satisfy a superior, but not enough to change anything substantial. You know this, yet you feel a familiar ache that arises whenever you hold information expected to matter. It is the ache of history being written in increments, too small to see, too small to celebrate. The fog wraps around you like a shawl. Its softness blunts the edges of buildings, fences, even your own shadow. Footsteps behind you are muted into echoes that vanish as soon as they form. A car drives past slowly, tyres hissing on wet pavement, the red glow of tail lights fading like embers. You continue walking, the cold sinking deeper into your collar. You pass a public fountain, long since drained for the season. Water once spilled from the stone figure at its centre, but now the basin lies empty, catching only fallen leaves and discarded bottle caps. The statue's face, worn smooth by time, stares down with an expression that might have been wisdom or fatigue or both. You pause briefly to study it, hearing the faint hum of electricity from the nearby street lamp. The air smells of wet stone and distant chimneys. Coal smoke drifts in slow, heavy ribbons, curling around the corners of buildings like a creature searching for warmth. The scent settles on your coat, weaving into the fabric until it becomes part of you. You find comfort in its stubbornness. It reminds you that some things refuse to disappear, no matter how modern the world claims to be. As you continue down the winding street, you sense how the city shifts under fog. During the day, alleys, signs, and intersections assert themselves with confidence. At night, especially a night like this, they surrender control. Shapes blur, directions soften. Familiar places seem newly invented. It is as though the city has loosened its grip and allowed imagination to fill the gaps left behind. You turn into a courtyard, barely visible through the mist. Cobblestones fan outward from a dry fountain, and benches line the perimeter beneath skeletal trees. Their branches stretch into the whiteness above, resembling old ink strokes on damp parchment. You sit on one of the benches, the wood cold against your palms. The quiet feels heavier here, as though the courtyard collects silence the way libraries collect dust. You remove the documents from your coat and hold them lightly in your hands. The paper is cool, edges crisp from careful trimming. Written lines cover the surface, steady and intentional, but you know that the meaning these lines pretend to hold will be diluted by tomorrow's disagreements. You read a few sentences, lips moving silently. They describe a shipment that might be rerouted, a schedule that might be adjusted, a contact who might be unreliable. Might, possibly, likely, anticipated. Words that sketch shadows without substance. Sometimes you wonder why people insist on treating speculation as destiny. There is something comforting, you suppose, in believing that uncertainty can be managed through ink and formal language. But reading these notes in the fog-softened quiet makes the pretense almost tender. Human beings trying to cage the vastness of possibility with small, assertive sentences. You refold the papers and return them to your coat. Their weight seems to melt into the fog around you. A chill moves across your shoulders, and you pull your coat tighter. The bench creaks beneath you, the sound so gentle it could be mistaken for a sigh. The fog thickens again, swirling gently like a curtain being drawn. Shapes approach and recede with vague outlines. A couple walks through the courtyard, hand in hand, speaking softly. Their voices drift toward you, blurred into a single warm tone. They glance your way briefly, likely seeing only a silhouette. They continue onward, their steps fading into the whiteness, until only the memory of them remains. Another shape emerges, an elderly man leaning on a cane. He walks slowly, each step measured with care. You watch as he passes beneath the lamppost. The fog halos him in soft light, turning his outline into a stroke of charcoal against pale paper. He pauses near the dry fountain, looks up at the blurred sky, then continues on. You feel an unexpected kinship with his deliberate pace, as if both of you are navigating a world that has decided clarity is unnecessary. You rise from the bench and begin walking again. The streets feel narrower now, the fog pressing gently against your shoulders like a guiding hand. The city's sounds become muffled whispers, distant laughter, a radio playing an old melody behind a closed window, a dog barking once before returning to silence. You cross a canal, pausing at the midpoint of the bridge, where the iron railings glisten with moisture. Below, the water moves slowly, carrying faint ripples that glow under the street lamps. The fog hangs just above the surface, turning the canal into a pale drifting mirror. The reflection of the railing appears to float, suspended between water and air. You lean on the railing and feel the cold seep through your gloves. Information sits inside your coat pocket like a patient spectre, waiting for you to decide its next destination. You feel its presence the way a musician feels the weight of an instrument, familiar, burdensome, and strangely reassuring. The truth written on those pages should feel sharper, more urgent. Yet tonight, under the heavy fog, it feels softened, not erased, but humbled. You begin to realize something quietly honest. The world often attributes importance to things not because they are true, but because they are delivered in official envelopes. You stay on the bridge for a few more breaths, letting the chill settle into your bones. The city around you moves in slow motions. Lights from distant apartments blink faintly, softened by the mist. A tram bell rings far away, its sound reaching you like a memory rather than a present moment. You leave the bridge and make your way toward home. The fog thins slightly as you walk, revealing the edges of buildings once more. Your footsteps sound louder against the pavement, as though the city is listening more intently now. As you approach your door, you feel the weight in your pocket shift with your movement. Those pages will be delivered tomorrow, placed in hands that will read too much into them. Arguments will spark, plans will be drafted, meetings arranged. People will assign significance to the details, unaware of how small they seem when carried through fog-softened streets. You step inside and close the door behind you. The air inside is warmer, calmer. You remove the documents and set them on the table, watching them lie flat in the lamplight. They appear lighter now, as if the fog outside has eased something from their edges. You sit in the stillness, the night pressing softly against the windows. Secrets, you realize, do not grow heavier because they are dangerous. They grow heavier because they are carried in silence. And tonight, that silence has followed you home like a quiet, patient shadow. The morning arrives reluctantly, dragging a pale wash of light across your room as though someone has drawn a thin curtain between night and day. You wake with a faint stiffness in your shoulders, the kind that comes from carrying thoughts heavier than the papers tucked into your coat. Outside, the fog has thinned but not vanished. It lingers in corners, clinging to gutters and drifting across rooftops like an unmade promise. You step into the street with quiet intent, letting your footsteps fall into the rhythm of the waking city. The air smells of damp stone, and the first fires lit in narrow kitchens. You walk past rows of buildings that wear their age with the dignity of overused notebooks, full of annotations, smudged corners, torn edges. You move through the familiar maze of intersections until you reach the administrative quarter, where architecture favours symmetry over comfort. A stone building rises ahead, each window as square and stern as the ideology preached inside. You enter through a heavy door that always seems to close a fraction too slowly, as if the building is reluctant to let go of those who step inside. The lobby is quiet, its marble floors echoing every step you make. A clerk behind a desk nods at you with a politeness that feels rehearsed. You return the nod, neither warm nor cold, and continue down a hallway lined with framed slogans that urge unity, obedience, vigilance. Their colours are faded, their edges curling, yet no one dares replace them. Outdated certainty is still certainty. You enter the briefing room. The air inside is thick, not with smoke, though some meetings have that, but with the kind of pressure created when people sit together and pretend their combined seriousness will produce clarity. The walls are adorned with maps whose colours never quite stay within the borders drawn for them. Names and lines shift depending on political weather, not geography. You take your place among the others. They settle into their chairs with the solemnity of people preparing for a ritual rather than a conversation. A long table stretches through the centre of the room, polished to a shine that reflects the overhead lights in thin, sterile streaks. A senior official enters. His footsteps are slow and heavy, the sound of a man convinced that gravity itself respects his rank. He places a stack of folders on the table, adjusts his glasses with deliberate intention, and surveys the room as though expecting applause. The briefing begins. Words fill the air. Phrases like strategic advantage, ideological fortification, projected influence zones. You hear them and feel your mind drift, not out of disrespect, but out of familiarity. These speeches, delivered with unwavering conviction, have become part of the landscape of your life. A predictable weather pattern of certainty layered upon uncertainty. Charts are unfurled. Arrows point in directions, chosen more for dramatic effect than accuracy. A map is projected onto the wall, displaying regions shaded in intimidating colours, each hue representing the imagined intentions of people who have likely never seen themselves rendered in such tones. You listen, eyebrows relaxed, posture steady. What interests you isn't the content of the briefing. Most of it consists of educated guesses draped in bureaucratic confidence, but the tone. Officials speak as though they are moving pieces on that projected map, nudging nations with their fingertips. Their voices carry a quiet arrogance, the belief that complexity yields to conviction. Across the table, someone clears their throat and begins discussing counter-strategies. You suppress the urge to smile. The term suggests a kind of grand duel, two masterminds locked in endless combat. Yet you know, from long nights spent decoding trivial messages, that most decisions are born from exhaustion rather than cunning. You take notes, not because you need them, but because the act reassures those who expect documentation. Words flow onto the page in clean, controlled lines. Assessment, concerns, recommendations. The paper receives them obediently, unaware that much of the discussion will be revised, contradicted, or forgotten by tomorrow morning. The official leading the briefing delivers his conclusions with a solemn flourish. He speaks of inevitable outcomes and necessary steps, phrases that have become so common they now feel like punctuation rather than content. You watch the faces around the room. Some nod with genuine conviction, others nod with practiced agreement. A few stare at the table, their minds wandering elsewhere. Yet all of them maintain the posture of participants in an important moment. You wonder, not for the first time, whether any of them believe what they say. Perhaps belief has become irrelevant. What matters is the performance, the act of appearing steadfast in a world that grows more uncertain each month. Someone asks a question about resource distribution. Another challenges a timeline. A third raises concerns about morale. Their voices overlap gently, forming a low hum of dissent that never becomes dangerous. Everyone here understands the choreography. Debate is allowed, but only in ways that strengthen the illusion of progress. You sit quietly, observing the conversation shift in circles. The strategies being proposed echo others you've heard months ago, perhaps years. Modifications are made, but the core remains the same: a faith in control, a denial of futility. And slowly, as you observe the room, a familiar realization descends again. Not heavy, but resigned. No one is winning, not the people speaking with conviction, not the people listening with doubt, not the ones drawing borders on maps, or the ones patrolling those borders in the cold. Everyone here is part of a system that claims direction but moves in loops. Outside, the world follows its own pace, unpredictable, human, unstyled. In here, people attempt to shape that world using charts and stern expressions. You feel a quiet tenderness toward them, for their effort if not their accuracy. Humans are at their most endearing when they believe their rituals tame reality. The briefing drags on, and your gaze drifts to the window. Beyond the glass, snowflakes begin to fall. Slow, unhurried, spaced like punctuation in a sentence that has not yet settled on its meaning. The flakes melt against the pane, streaking downward in thin lines. You watch them until someone calls your name. You respond evenly, offering a measured observation that neither challenges nor supports the prevailing opinion. Your words land gently in the air, unnoticed by most but acknowledged by those who expect your participation. It is a skill, contributing without altering the room's carefully balanced illusion. When the meeting finally dissolves, chairs scrape the floor in discordant unison. People gather their folders with the gravity of priests concluding a ritual. You slip your notebook into your coat and leave the room quietly, stepping into a hallway where the lights buzz faintly. The air outside feels sharper, cleaner. You descend the stone steps of the building and walk into the early evening, where snow continues its slow descent onto the city's shoulders. Lights glow through the whiteness, softened and uncertain. The world looks peaceful from here, untouched by the diagrams and forecasts you've just heard. You pass a cigarette stand where a few workers smoke in silence. One laughs, a deep, unrestrained sound that carries across the street. The warmth of his breath forms a cloud that lifts into the falling snow before disappearing. Their conversation seems more grounded than the whole briefing combined, a simple exchange of fatigue, humour, and shared humanity. You turn down a quieter street where the snow lies undisturbed. Your footprints leave shallow impressions behind you. You feel the weight of the day lift slightly as you walk, replaced by a sense of clarity that comes only when you step away from places where certainty is forced to exist. The truth settles in your chest with calm acceptance. The world is not a chessboard, and the people moving its pieces are not grandmasters. They are men and women with limited information, limited imagination, and an unlimited supply of confidence. You continue walking, your breath a fading cloud in the cold air, and you feel a quiet, almost tender understanding. In an age obsessed with victory, the real constant is the shared, unspoken knowledge that no one is winning, yet everyone keeps playing because stopping would require admitting that the game was never real. The snow has stopped by the time you step into the late-night chill, leaving behind a thin veil that clings to roofs and railings. The city hums beneath the frost, quieter than usual, as if it too has grown weary of its own routines. You walk with steady steps, the soft crunch under your shoes, marking your progress in delicate, fading impressions. Your breath drifts upward in pale ribbons. The street lamps cast halos on the snow, circles of warmth that barely graze the ground. Windows glow sparsely across the block, each square of yellow light a reminder that other people have settled into their evenings, wrapped in domestic rituals you've never quite mastered. Their routines belong to lives rooted in familiarity. Yours leans toward movement, toward the understanding that permanence is a luxury reserved for those who do not traffic in manufactured truths. The documents you carry tonight are not the weighty kind. No strategy reports, no coded messages, only a collection of items that allow you to slip from one existence into another with minimal resistance. A passport bearing a name you have worn like an uncomfortable coat, a train ticket purchased days ago through channels that ensure it will never appear on any ledger meant to be read. A small key that opens a locker, itself tucked inside a building few people bother to enter. Each object represents a thread in a tapestry woven quietly across months. You have prepared well. The details settle around you like soft dust. You turn down a street lined with shuttered shops. Their signs sway faintly in the wind, creaking with the exhaustion of long service. A stray advertisement flaps against a wooden pole, a curling notice for a concert long past its date. The city forgets nothing and remembers nothing with equal determination. Your pace slows as you near a modest apartment building, one indistinguishable from the next, a place that has never demanded anything from you except occasional presence. You enter through the side door, which sticks in colder weather. The hallway smells of old varnish, and lingering cabbage from a neighbour's kitchen. You nod at the familiarity of the scent. It greets you without sentiment, without attachment. Inside your room, everything waits exactly as you left it earlier. You take a moment to stand near the window, watching the snow soften the angles of parked cars below. The darkness feels gentler tonight, more forgiving. You begin gathering the few items you still keep here. The pen that writes in a hand too neutral to betray emotion. The scarf bought hastily during an early winter. The small tin containing spare buttons and a thread of black string. Practical things, forgettable things. You do not pack much. It turns out that you never owned much to begin with. Not here, not in any of the places you've been assigned. Your life has been organised around impermanence, a series of addresses chosen for their anonymity, belongings selected for their lack of story. You pack them with the ease of someone accustomed to leaving before anything grows roots. The room feels neither empty nor full. It simply is, and that simplicity brings a strange comfort. You take one last look before turning off the lamp. Nothing in the space demands a farewell. Back outside, you blend into the quiet flow of the city. A night tram rattles past, its interior aglow with dim orange light. A few passengers stare through the windows at nothing in particular, their faces softened by fatigue. You watch it go, the metal wheels carving faint sparks as it curves into the distance. The platform you head toward lies near the edge of the district, a modest structure built more for utility than appearance. It serves a route seldom used except by workers leaving late shifts or travellers uninterested in crowded departures. The building itself seems to huddle against the cold, its bricks darker than the rest of the street, as though they've absorbed more winters than their neighbours. Inside, the station is nearly empty. A lone attendant sits behind a glass window, flipping through a thin magazine with the expression of someone accustomed to long stretches of stillness. A clock hangs crookedly on the wall above him. Its second hand stutters slightly before continuing its sweep, as though uncertain about proceeding. You take a seat on a narrow bench, its wooden slats firm and unwelcoming. The silence here is of a particular kind. Not cold, not expectant, but pragmatic. People who leave from this station rarely require ceremony. Departures happen like breaths, unnoticed, necessary, fleeting. You settle into the bench, letting the stillness seep into your bones. It wraps around you like a thin blanket, woven from resignation and routine. A faint vibration runs through the floor as a distant locomotive shifts its weight on the tracks. You close your eyes briefly, allowing the hum to travel through you. The sensation reminds you of countless other stations, different cities, different governments, different seasons, each one marked by the same muted promise that you will be gone before anyone decides you should stay. A janitor appears from a side door, dragging a mop bucket whose wheels squeak rhythmically. He moves with slow determination, as though measured pace might persuade the night to pass more gently. He glances at you once, offering a nod that feels neither curious nor suspicious. Just acknowledgement, the kind you've learned to appreciate more deeply than praise. You reach into your coat and retrieve the small notebook, where you occasionally jot brief observations. Not emotions. Those tend to dissolve before the ink dries, but notes about moments that feel too precise to trust to memory. Tonight, you write only a line. Movement does not require urgency. Absence does not require grief. The thought settles on the page like a feather, weightless yet sincere. A distant speaker crackles with static before producing a soft announcement. The next train, it says, will arrive soon. You return the notebook to your coat and straighten your posture, not out of necessity, but habit. You have learned to meet departures with a calm front, perhaps because leaving has become your closest imitation of consistency. As you wait, the station grows slightly colder. The fog outside presses against the windows, blurring the edge of the platform. Lamps cast elongated shadows across the floor, stretching toward you as if offering company. You watch them flicker in quiet intervals. Thoughts drift through you, not memories exactly, but impressions from years of moving through borrowed lives. Faces that greeted you without understanding. Rooms that held your presence without absorbing it. Conversations where you played a version of yourself suited to the moment. You realize, with the soft ache of recognition, how little of your life has belonged to you. The rest has been shaped by imitation, performance, adaptation. A strange truth forms in your mind. You have become skilled at leaving, not because you prefer distance, but because remaining would require a permanence you were never afforded. The train arrives with a low rumble, slowing until it rests alongside the platform with a hiss of steam. Its windows glow faintly, casting wavering light across the bench. The doors open with a gentle clatter. You rise, brushing a trace of dust from your coat. For a moment you stand there, watching the open door, as if it were a passage, not just to another city, but to a quieter version of yourself. You feel the outline of your current identity, slipping a little, loosening around the edges like a garment that has been worn thin. No one calls your name, no one watches you board. You step into the carriage, your footfall absorbed by the soft floorboards. The interior smells faintly of wool, metal, and the remnants of fading conversations. You choose a seat near the window, resting your hand lightly on the armrest. Outside, the station remains unchanged, a dim structure holding on to its quiet habits. Your reflection in the glass is faint, almost translucent. You watch it without attachment. The doors close, the train shudders, then begins to move. The platform slides away, its edges dissolving into the fog. Buildings blur into vague shapes. Lampposts stretch into thin streaks of light. The city recedes with unceremonious ease, as though it has learned not to depend on the people who leave it. You sit still, listening to the soft rattle of wheels. The motion soothes you, a steady lullaby hummed in iron and rhythm. The truth settles gently inside you. This departure, like so many before, is not an ending. It is simply the next step in a long practice of disappearing gracefully. A quiet exit that leaves no echo, no trace, but the thin line of a train pulling away into the darkened countryside, carrying a name that never quite fit and a life that was always meant to be temporary. You arrive as winter is loosening its grip, the early light staining the horizon with a careful, washed-out gold. The train has left the countryside behind, and the city returns to meet you, not as a revelation, but as a patient friend. Buildings reassemble themselves from the blur. Familiar shop signs claim their places along the street. The same corner baker slides open his shutter with the same practiced flick. Nothing in the city hails you as changed. That is precisely what you prefer. You walk through neighborhoods that look as if they were painted to reassure people. Clean lines, predictable windows, curtains arranged in ways that suggest privacy and civility. The air holds a faint sweetness from someone's boiling stew. An old man on a bench folds a newspaper with the exact precision of habit. These small certainties settle over you like a blanket you did not ask for, but are grateful to accept. You move among them with the soft fatigue of someone who has learned to trade drama for steadiness. Inside the apartment you still keep, the kettle whistles the same little song it has for years. Your key turns in the lock without protest. The room smells of dust and lemon polish, of books you keep more for the comfort of their spines than for the content inside. Lamps throw rounded puddles of light on the floor. Shadows gather politely in corners. Nothing here quite claims you, nor demands to. It is an environment designed to hold someone who must remain slightly unremarkable. You unpack the small case you carried on the train, the passport with its borrowed name, the practical shoes, the pen with a worn clip. Each object slides into its place as if they have been waiting in a queue for you to arrive. Your hand lingers on the pen, an almost private gesture. It has written coded messages that led to meetings. It has leaned against maps. It has left neat lines on paper that convinced others of the gravity of trifles. Now it rests. The future has a way of seeming less urgent when you stop expecting the next signal. You make tea and stand by the window, letting the steam from the cup fog the glass in small ephemeral patterns. Outside, life resumes its modest choreography. A woman calls her dog back from the curb. A tradesman sweeps his stoop with the same rhythmic precision as the day before. You watch them without envy. There is a relief, almost naive, in not being measured by clandestine usefulness. For once, your value is not tied to discretion or the smooth delivery of a hidden scrap of paper. You are allowed to be small. The people who belong to this quieter existence do not know the languages you speak, not the ones written on folded slips or hidden in the slant of a glance, and they do not need to. You nod when the grocer asks how you are, you buy the same round of cheese you always do, you listen to a neighbour remark on the weather, offering the brief, practiced empathy of a person content with ordinary rhythms. These gestures are not dishonest so much as economical. They save you the trouble of explanation. There is a gentle humour in the way the ordinary insists on itself. You find it in the small ironies that have peppered your life all along. Staunch officials arguing about morality while arranging shipments for vanity projects. Young men reciting the rhetoric of the future with the same breath they use to complain about sore feet. These contradictions are not scandalous to you. They are domestic, endearing almost, like a pair of slippers with a hole in one toe. People believe they are architects of destiny, while fitting their days around service counters and soup lines. You cannot help but admire how deeply conviction and routine entwine. At night, you sit with a book you do not read. Your eyes roam the lines without landing. Your mind catalogues the small sounds of the building. A neighbour turns a key quietly in the next flat. Someone coughs. A distant radio plays a song that used to be popular in an earlier decade. The city keeps its soft, loyal inventory of noises, and you take notes only in the way you remember them, as if to prove to yourself that noise, like people, persists, no matter who names it. Once, danger felt like a proper presence, immediate, combustible, and vivid. Now danger is a faint statistical notion, a ledger entry rather than an alarm. You have grown fond of that attenuation. The adrenaline that once sharpened your thoughts now tastes like metal and regret when summoned. Instead, you learn to prefer the patience of civility. There is an art to living without constant threat. It requires you to cultivate small pleasures and to be faithful to routines that do not announce themselves as heroic. Sometimes sleep arrives quickly. Other nights, it must be coaxed in by the slow, tactile business of domesticity. You fold a sheet with the precise motions you learned long ago for disguising packages, smoothing the creases with the same kind of care. You find absurd comfort in such repetition. There is a lesson in it that has nothing to do with tradecraft. Predictability can be a balm. Your relationships settle into a different economy. You exchange fewer secrets for greater presence. You learn to keep some stories folded, not from expediency, but from choice. There is a modest joy in telling someone about a movie you saw and not measuring the words for coded meanings or possible retransmission. The brusque intimacy of ordinary confessions. Complaining about a landlord, marvelling at a new shop window, becomes a kind of rehearsal for a life you begin to admit you might one day inhabit fully. Yet you remain a skilled actor in small things. Old habits are difficult to unlearn. When a stranger asks for directions, you respond with the exact latitude of the nearest tram stop, not because you are trying to mislead, but because precision is how you show care. In conversations, you choose neutral gestures and comfortable silences, the very tools that once kept you safe. They now make you amiable, a man who speaks plainly and whose face does not insist on metaphors. At times, a particular sound or phrase will return, a memory sharp as glass. The rattle of a tram, a clipped announcement in a station, the faint smell of cigarette smoke threaded through a cafe. They arrive without warning and settle beneath your ribs like a familiar coin. You do not let them govern you. Instead, you greet them, the way one greets an old acquaintance at the market, with a nod, a small remark, and then you move on. There are nights when you find yourself tracing the map of an earlier life in your mind, not to reconstruct it in full, but to acknowledge the traces you left. You remember street corners that served as rendezvous points, benches that served as deposit boxes for folded words, the muted light of safe house windows. Those places exist like annotations in a book you once helped edit. They add texture, but are not necessary to the plot you now prefer to live. You are not untouched by the moral ambivalence of your work. Sometimes the ledger of possibilities reopens in late hours, and you consider the strange economy of information. How small facts were often amplified and presented as decisive. How rumour and projection so easily donned the robes of certainty. Yet the sting of recrimination is mild. You did what was required, and the world did what it does best, converting effort into story. That knowledge is both humbling and oddly consoling. The quiet life you return to is not a betrayal of your past. Rather, it is its patient sequel. The skills you once honed, listening, patience, the talent for simple facades, slip neatly into civilian usefulness. You find employment that prefers measured steadiness to theatrical genius. A small office, a modest salary, colleagues who delight in weekend plans. You answer emails, you sign forms. You enjoy the peculiar thrill of booking a proper holiday without asking whether the itinerary will be used to conceal anything. On rare afternoons, you walk to the river and stand for a while, watching barges drift slowly by and couples stroll their dogs. You think about belonging as a practice rather than a destination. Most people belong by staying, planting gardens, naming pets, breakfasting at the same cafe. You practice belonging by attendance. By being present without expectation, that presence will be measured. It turns out to be less lonely than you predicted. There is a tenderness that grows in this slow, careful return. Not the overwrought sentiment of reunion scenes, but the steady, unflashy kind. You learn to enjoy the small betrayals of domesticity, buying a plant that you remember to water, choosing a favourite chair, and defending it with gentle possessiveness, teaching a neighbour the precise way you prefer your tea. These small attachments become not chains, but ornaments, modest markers that suggest a life forming its own gravity. When sleep finally comes, it asks nothing of you. It settles like a soft hand across your face, inviting a rest that does not require vigilance. Your dreams are not empty of past images, but they are less populated by urgency. Faces you once saw only in half-light appear now with full features, ordinary and unthreatening. You wake with the slow surprise of someone who has spent too long expecting alarms and found instead a room full of quiet. You understand now what your life has taught you beyond the skills of subterfuge and careful composure. It taught you how to move gently through people's small cruelties and greater kindnesses, how to enjoy moments without immediately measuring their usefulness, how to allow presence to exist without using it as currency. That, more than any clever cipher or staged encounter, feels like the achievement worth carrying home. Outside, the city continues to keep its small routines. Trams arrive on time, shops open. The world does not notice your change, because it never had the right to. It moves regardless, an indifferent but faithful companion. You, who once lived between facades, now choose a life that is quietly steady and, in its own modest way, true. You pick up your pen, not to encode a message, but to write a note recalling the day's small mercy, the way light fell across the kitchen table, the taste of a tea brewed without ceremony, the laugh of a neighbour in the stairwell. You place it in a drawer and close it gently. It is a record for no one but yourself. Who wins and who loses matters less to you now. What matters is the soft labour of belonging, the patient art of returning to a world that never expected you to stay, and deciding, with tender and private conviction, that you will. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.